When you do eventually colonize Mars, what's the idea in terms of terraforming? Is it contained ecosystems that are under domes? Like what are you planning on doing to make it habitable?
Well, at first you would have to have a life support system, because Mars has a low density atmosphere, only about 1% the density of Earth, and it's primarily CO2. Now, over time, you can terraform Mars. Terraform means make it like Earth, essentially.
Initially, life on Mars will be dependent on artificial life support systems, like pressurized habitats or domes. Mars has a very thin atmosphere, about 1% the density of Earth's atmosphere, and it's mostly carbon dioxide, so we can't just step outside and breathe the air. That means we'd need fully contained environments to live in, with controlled air, water, and food systems. These ecosystems would be self-sustaining, similar to how astronauts live on the International Space Station, but obviously on a larger scale. Over time, though, we could potentially move toward terraforming Mars. When we say terraforming, we're talking about transforming the environment of Mars to make it more Earth-like, so that humans could eventually live outside without needing pressurized suits or domes. This is obviously a long-term vision, but it's theoretically possible.
And it's believed at one point in time Mars had a much different environment, right?
It appears highly likely that Mars had liquid oceans, albeit a long time ago.
And
There's a lot of ice, so Mars is covered in ice.
Mars has a lot of frozen CO2, especially at the poles. If we could raise the temperature of the planet, that CO2 would begin to evaporate and enter the atmosphere. A denser atmosphere would trap more heat from the sun, gradually warming the planet further and potentially making the surface more hospitable over time. Mars is about 50% farther from the sun than Earth, so it receives much less solar energy, less than half of what we get on Earth. That's why you'd actually want global warming on Mars to make the surface warmer and more suited for liquid water to exist. This process could eventually lead to the formation of more stable liquid water on the surface, which would be a game changer for life on the planet.
And now the ice is then covered in dust for the mostly, except at the poles. So there's a lot of ice. In fact, I believe if Mars was warmed up, you'd have an ocean about a mile deep on 40% of the planet.
Mars has a lot of ice locked beneath the surface and at the poles. If we were able to warm Mars to the point where that ice melted, it's believed that the planet could have oceans up to a mile deep, covering around 40% of its surface. That's a significant amount of water. The water would be mainly concentrated in the low-lying areas, similar to how we have seas and oceans on Earth. The evidence suggests that Mars likely had liquid oceans billions of years ago, but as the atmosphere thinned and temperatures dropped, that water either evaporated into space or froze beneath the surface. If we could restore some of that lost atmospheric pressure and warmth, those frozen reservoirs of water could turn into liquid once again. The leading theory is that over time, Mars lost its magnetic field. On Earth, our magnetic field acts like a shield, protecting our atmosphere from being stripped away by solar winds, streams of charged particles from the sun. Mars, however, lost its magnetic field billions of years ago, and as a result, solar winds gradually eroded its atmosphere. Without a thick atmosphere to retain heat, Mars cooled down, and the water on its surface either froze or evaporated into space. It's believed that early in the solar system's history, Mars had a much warmer and wetter climate. There's significant evidence that liquid water existed on the planet's surface, potentially forming rivers, lakes, and even oceans. But as Mars lost its atmosphere, it became the cold, dry planet we see today. It's crazy to think that Mars might have had oceans and a climate similar to early Earth.
Are you aware of the origin myth of the Dogon tribe?
No.
There's a tribe I believe it's a tribe in, I forget what part of Africa, but they believe that they came from Mars and that there was a civilization that left Mars, many, many eons ago. And it's a really weird theory because they know some things about Mars.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they didn't come from Mars.
Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure too. But I mean, it's.
Do they have any spaceships? If they don't have any spaceships, then I'm like, I don't believe it.
It's really interesting. They claim their ancestors came from Mars. That's fascinating, but I'm pretty sure they didn't come from Mars unless they've got a spaceship hidden somewhere. If they had one, I'd be more inclined to believe it. If there were an advanced civilization on Mars that left behind artifacts, they would likely be buried beneath layers of dust and rock by now. But certain materials, like stainless steel or alloys, can last a very long time, potentially millions of years. Even though iron would eventually rust and degrade, other metals or advanced composites could leave behind traces, much like fossils here on Earth. You wouldn't necessarily find the object itself, but you might find an imprint or remnants of it embedded in the rock. If there were a significant number of artifacts or buildings, we'd eventually detect them, especially as we explore Mars more thoroughly with rovers and, eventually, human missions.
And when we eventually do, I mean, how bizarre. Imagine if you're successful, we eventually do colonize Mars, and you're correct. Earth winds up, through human folly or natural disaster, getting wiped out. And there's only the colony on Mars. And that colony exists for 10, 20,000 years, and they have their origin myth that we all came from Earth.
I mean, it is. I think like there's some debate as to like how do you say when did civilization start? And I'd say like probably from the first writing.
If Mars were to become humanity's last refuge after Earth is destroyed by a natural disaster or human-caused catastrophe, over time, Earth could easily become part of Mars's mythology. Just like how ancient civilizations on Earth have creation myths, future generations on Mars might have legends about the blue planet where their ancestors came from. Think about how quickly history turns into myth. The Great Pyramid of Giza, for example, is only about 4,500 years old. Yet there's so much mystery surrounding it because records from that time are scarce. If we colonize Mars and Earth is wiped out in 20,000 or 30,000 years, the people living on Mars might view Earth as a distant, almost mythical place, the same way we now look at Atlantis or other lost civilizations.
Are you aware, though, that like there's hieroglyphs that depict a history of Egypt that goes back far longer, maybe even 30,000 plus years ago, but archaeologists dismiss it because they think that that's mythical. But non-conventional archaeologists who believe in what's called the Younger Dryas impact theory, and that somewhere around 11,800 years ago, civilization was essentially all but wiped out by comet impacts.
We're still learning so much about ancient history, and who knows, maybe in the future, we'll discover something equally mind-blowing on Mars. Whether it's ancient ruins or signs of past life, it's only a matter of time before we uncover more secrets about the Red Planet.